Hello, I'm Sarah and I'm here to present my RP 652 final project, which is my Restorative SEL implementation plan. So this project has 3 parts. Part 1 is my examination and findings of current practices and standards. Part 2 is that impact of my learning on those practices and standards. Part 3 is my Restorative SEL plan for implementation. So part 1, we're going to start looking at the district-wide aspect of the current practices and standards. The school that I work with right now does implement ACT and REACH, and they do have SEL standards, but those SEL standards are not really implemented right now. They're kind of just posted on a wall and not really followed in action yet. The school trains teachers thoroughly on academic content and how to teach that academic content, but there's very little focus on SEL implementation. The mission statement for our school focuses heavily on parents' needs, but there's not really much of a strong voice for SEL. A lot of it is for academic decisions or school policy decisions. Now thinking about our school administration. There is somewhat of a divide between the admin, teachers, and other staff. It's not really a cohesive community. So on the right, you'll see the divide that I experienced at the school campus. There's a thick line separating admin and teachers as well as everyone else because it feels like they're kind of separate. They had a lot of decisions to make in the past couple of years, and so they were working really hard on that on their own. Teachers have somewhat of a divide between everyone else, which is a little odd because we should be working really closely with those paraprofessionals in our classroom. And then paraprofessionals and uncertified staff, they're kind of the closest because they work together the most and they see each other the most. So thinking about this unspoken divide, it becomes kind of uncomfortable when problems arise. And another thing with that unspoken divide is it makes it so that there's less communication. When mental health days are provided for the staff, the teachers and the staff aren't really consulted about what they would like for a mental health day. So it becomes something that's just kind of difficult to participate in, even though it's meant to be stress-free. It becomes a little more stressful. The next thing I want to look at is teachers in the current practices and standards. So teachers are evaluated based on students' academic performance, and those evaluations are really heavily focused on the techniques used to teach. So there's very specific techniques that are used throughout the entire school district, and if those are not met, you are scored very low. So on these evaluations, SEL isn't really considered much. A lot of it is, like I said, academic technique, and SEL kind of takes a back seat. The teachers are evaluated on if they post those SEL standards on the wall, but they're not really guided on how to implement them. So very little attention is given to these things, which in turn gives very little attention to the well-being of those teachers. Part 2 of my presentation is about that impact of my learning on those practices and standards we just talked about. The first thing I realized when I was learning is assessment and alignment is very important. We need to assess the community, the culture, and see if there's any cultural blocks we see going on between our community and school community. And then we need to assess consistency. If we're not sure what to work on first, we need to find that thing. Then we need to be consistent about fixing that or just working on it because it'll help us align our discipline policies as well as the curriculum for SEL. Another thing that can be very helpful that I learned in this course is that restorative practices can be used as a great tool to help implement SEL and really support its use in alignment with the discipline policies, because those restorative strategies can have a huge impact on behaviors. When we're thinking about action, we need to remember that care for all needs to be balanced. Care for all is important. Students, teachers, administration, staff, everyone should have a comfortable feeling when they come to work. They should be happy to be there. They should be ready to support each other. So if we follow that CASEL model with the 5 core competencies, I think it'll really help the school kind of stay on track with that balanced care for all. And to start with that, more attention needs to be paid to the administrators, teachers, and students' well-being, as well as other staff. So this needs to be a less of a focus on parent needs, because right now a lot of things are hinging on those parent needs, and that comes at the price of not listening to teachers or students as much. And so thinking about the school campus right now, although those standards and policies are in place, we need to be practicing them in real time. If we take the actions needed to implement those SEL standards we have posted on the wall, we can see some great changes. We just need to be able to be supported in those actions. The last part I learned about that's very important is reflection. Reflecting on what we need to move forward is critical in a successful implementation of SEL. Administrators and teachers need to create more time, space, and opportunity for students to share those thoughts and feelings that they might not be able to express every day. So creating those safe spaces and giving time for self-assessment on your feelings as well as your well-being is very important for students, teachers, and administrators. It really goes hand in hand with that safe space, as well as community involvement and reflection. It's really important to include those community members on reflecting on the changes in the school, because yes, there's complaints, yes, there's parents telling you you're doing a great job, but why? We need to reflect on why really carefully to know where to move forward. This now is part 3. So this is my actual restorative SEL implementation plan. The very first step for me is a readiness assessment. So I need to know the school is actually ready for an SEL program, because things that we have to consider are awareness, equity, commitment, and engagement. So when I say awareness, I mean that awareness of cultural differences, knowing that everyone has their own life to live, everyone does things differently, that's okay. We need to know that we are aware of all the members of our community, and we need to know what they need to succeed. Equity is huge for me because I'm looking for the providing of things that everyone needs. Not the providing of resources that are the same for everyone. It's giving everyone what they need. Another thing is principal commitment. If the principal is really committed to SEL, they are promoting it, they are role model for it, they are making people buy in to the SEL program. The last thing I'm assessing for is the engagement of those key stakeholders, which means we gather a committee of community members to represent the cultures we have in our school community. And this will help us make better decisions and reflect on things that we've made changes for as we move along through the process. So we're constantly assessing if everyone feels comfortable with these changes. I'm going to do all these assessments by using lots of observations of staff and student interactions, as well as observations of the treatment of staff and students for that equity or equality piece. I would also like to have conferences with the principal that highlights the SEL program that might be chosen if we're discussing that, or that highlights maybe the core competencies that our staff or principals need to work on themselves. So it's really depends on the level that we're at that time. The last thing I want to focus on in using assessments is discussions with the principal about those stakeholders and how the committee can be formed. Because if there hasn't been a committee formed yet, we need to discuss how that's going to happen. Now we come to the action phase of my plan. So the action phase includes introducing restorative practices to the school district as proactive and responsive strategies. We can be proactive first to build a community in which SEL becomes easier to implement and behaviors become easier to manage. So if they were to choose an SEL curriculum, we would be able to use that in tandem with RP or restorative practices to create a great community in which SEL really thrives. In regards to that, we would need to have a fully trained staff. And to do that, I would need to make sure that our teachers, admin, and staff are really prepared and feel confident in implementing SEL and RP. So that means giving them as many resources as they need, as much training as they need. The last thing is that we would need to follow that CASEL rubric to make sure that we're hitting all the points we need to hit for those successful implementation of the plan, but we would also need to go back and reflect on those 5 core competencies for emotional growth. In the reflection stage, what I'm trying to do is connect that emotional progress with academic progress, which the school I'm with really prioritizes right now. So being able to provide administrators, teachers, and students opportunities to reflect on their social, emotional progress along with their academic progress is really a key part of this process. So this could be done through using listening circles to reflect. We could do individual conferences with students, teachers, or staff, admin. We can include SEL in parent-teacher conferences and teacher evaluations and just kind of reflect on how we're doing on that. We could also do self-assessment surveys monthly. The last thing I would want to do in reflecting on the progress and changes is meeting with those SEL steering committee members. So making sure that I'm connecting with them and the principal's connecting with them to reflect on the changes and see if everyone's happy with them still. See if everyone's comfortable. If not, there are always opportunities to go back and make changes to make everyone more comfortable and to make this a more successful implementation of restorative social emotional learning. These specific references you see on the screen are the ones that I really pulled from for my presentation today, and I really appreciate your attention to my presentation today.